1, 2, 1, 2, testing. Is that okay?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Planning Committee. Could I, before I go any further, just advise members of the public who are speaking this evening and remind members, please do adjust your microphones and ensure that you speak clearly into them so everybody can hear what is being said. We are holding, as far as we can, a paperless meeting this evening, and so most members and officers will be using electronic devices to access their papers, look at drawings, etc. There are only a couple of hard copies up in the public gallery, but people can link in to the papers on the internet. We are webcasting the meeting this evening. It's being broadcast live around the world, including to the other side of the world, potentially, I think that's part of it, but also will be available for subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. Anyone who is interested but unable to attend this evening will be able to see the footage for the committee meeting. But that makes it all the more important that we speak clearly into our microphones and make sure they're turned on, as denoted by the little red light, because it's the microphones that guide the webcasting. By entering the chamber this evening, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. If you have any queries, particularly those people in the public gallery, please do speak to one of the stewards. Once you have been filmed, there's nothing that can be done about it, I'm afraid. You're recorded for forever. Okay, can I ask the committee clerk, please, to read out the public announcement?
Good evening. Council members, officers and members of the public are reminded that the use of mobile electronic devices in all meetings of the Council held in public is permitted, but for the use of Wi-Fi services only. You're asked to please leave the meeting should you wish to make or receive a telephone call. If the fire alarm goes off, which we aren't expecting this evening, please go down the main staircase out of the front entrance to congregate in Queen's Gardens until you're advised by a council officer that it's safe to return. The members of the committee will now introduce themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Scott, Chair of the Planning Committee.
Heather Cheesewood, Director of Planning and Strategic Transport.
Councillor Kabir, Vice Chair of the Committee.
Jason Perry, Councillor for Croham Ward.
Chris Wright, Colton East.
Good evening, Jamie Audsley, Councillor for Bensham Manor.
Councillor Joy Prince, Wadden Ward.
Ross Gentry, South Area Team Leader in Development Management.
Helen Fennell, Deputy Team Leader, North Team Development Management.
Ian Plowright, Head of Transport.
Ronald Burton, Senior Transport Planner.
Wayne Tracker-Slaughter, Councillor for South Norwood Ward.
Councillor Bernadette Khan.
Councillor Sue Winborn, Fairfield Ward.
Councillor Richard Chatterjee, Councillor for Shirley Ward and substituting for Councillor Luke Clancy this evening.
Margot Rowan, Committee Manager.
Richard Ford, Legal Advisor.
Sean Murphy, Legal Advisor to the Committee.
Thank you very much, everybody. First item on the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting, held on the 2nd of November. Are those agreed? Agreed, thank you. Apologies, as has already been noted, Councillor Chatterjee is replacing Councillor Clancy this evening. Disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest on the application before us? No. There are no items of urgent business and no exempt items, and we have no development presentations this evening. So it brings us on to the one planning application for decision, which is the Whitgift Shopping Centre and surrounding land. The presenting officer will be Ross Gentry. Ross, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline planning application for the Whitgift Shopping Centre and surrounding land. I'd just like to draw members' attention to page 36 of your committee papers. The reason for that is there's a plan that shows the illustrative ground floor layout of the scheme, and this identifies the names of the key areas of the site, and this will help you reference where we are as I go through my presentation. So the application before us is an outline parameter-based application. It's for the mixed-use redevelopment of the site through demolition, both within and outside the conservation area, alteration, refurbishment and retention of existing buildings and erection of new buildings to provide a range of town centre uses, including retail, leisure, residential, student accommodation or hotel, community facilities, office, residential amenity space and public realm, basement areas, underground servicing and car parking, vehicular and pedestrian access, utility and energy generation, infrastructure and associated facilities, and any required temporary works or structures. As I say, there are works taking place within the conservation area. There's demolition within the conservation area on buildings within George Street and North End. I won't say the specific addresses there, but they're all covered in the report. There's retention of building facades at number 5 George Street and 2 to 30 North End, which is the former Alders building, and the creation of basements beneath buildings within North End. And number 3 and 3A would be retained with minor works to facilitate construction. So outline planning permission and conservation area consent were granted back in 2014 for the redevelopment of the Whitgift Centre and the Chapel Walk entrance. These permissions are a material consideration and are given due weight. These could be implemented, although the developer has advised that it is no longer its intention to implement them, and that all discussions with anchors and key occupiers are predicated on the current planning application before us this evening. Since the 2014 scheme was granted, it has not been progressed any further. So the slide on the screen shows you the main differences from that 2014 consent. So it's the increased site area by bringing Green Park House into the site, the demolition rather than retention of the multi-storey car park on Wellesley Road, Whitgift Car Park, and the Marks and Spencer store for demolition, and these would be included in the redevelopment rather than being refurbished. An increased residential floor space and reconfiguration. The residential component is now proposed as build for rent with it affordable at discount market rents. The current scheme proposes 20% affordable housing, indicatively up to 193 units. The 2014 scheme was 15%, which was indicatively up to 90 units of affordable housing. An increased combined retail and leisure floor space. Changes to vehicular access and egress points, creation of a new area of public realm on Poplar Walk, step-free east-west route, the potential inclusion of a hotel use or student accommodation, and the provision of a single modern car park to serve the development. So those are the key changes. So the application site here is outlined in red, so we're all familiar with North End, Poplar Walk. This is Green Park House that's now come into the site that wasn't previously, down Wellesley Road, and then George Street. We've obviously got the existing Whitgift Centre on site, the former Alders building, 5 largely vacant office buildings, 3 car parks and Green Park House. It's really important just to take heed of the land level changes across the site, which aren't particularly apparent, but effectively is a 2.5 metre rise from west to east. So consequently, Wellesley Road is set slightly higher than North End. And this layout just helps to show you the extent of the site. So you can see the almshouses and the elements outside the site along George Street, including Electric House here, the HSBC building and Meridian House, and the rest of it is contained within the application site. Heritage assets are clearly very important, and this slide shows you in blue the Central Croydon Conservation Area in the context of the site. We have the orange are locally listed buildings. Then we have the darker red, we have the Whitgift Almshouses, Grade 1 listed, and we have the Parish Church of St Michael and All Angels, also Grade 1 listed, and we have the Grade 2 listed Electric House. So I've got a series of photographs now. We'll take you around the site. On the bottom right, you can see I've put a map with an arrow to give you a reference point as to where we are. So we're obviously within George Street now. This white terracotta facade would be retained as part of the proposals. This more recent addition would be removed, as would the mansard roof and the elements behind, and the ground floor elements would be enhanced where that facade would be retained. We're now looking at the almshouses, and in the background, important to note, centre tower would be removed, as would these elements to the rear of that terracotta facade. Looking down now towards the former Alders building that would be retained and enhanced with improvements at ground floor level. And we're now looking in what is the grammar school yard, which was previously the entrance to Whitgift School. These two buildings would be retained. The entrance and centre tower would be removed. We're just moving up North End now. You can just make out this more recent addition, which is the buildings that would be demolished to make way for the 24-hour East-West Galleria. And we've now stepped up to Chapel Walk West. You'll note from the papers that permission was granted in 2014 for a new entrance building in this location. We have this particular building at the back here makes a positive contribution to the conservation area, but as can be seen from the photo, it's not particularly visible and is obscured by the frontage building, which makes a neutral contribution and a structure that detracts from those elements. In terms of this scheme before us tonight, the maximum scenario would be to continue the building line, and the minimum scenario would be a setback structure behind the rear of these facades. And this is the Marks and Spencer's building to the north. We've got Poplar Walk as it wraps round. You can see the fact that this is two almost distinct buildings. This is to be demolished due to incompatibility of the existing building with the requirements of modern retailers. And it must be acknowledged that this building also makes a positive contribution to the conservation area. Now, the loss of this building and the rear section of the Thomas Cook building could amount to substantial harm when assessed against emerging policy. Now, substantial public benefits of the scheme can be weighed against this harm. This has been done, and given the extent of the substantial public benefits and the controls in place, their demolition is considered to be acceptable. We're now looking along Poplar Walk, and you can see the juxtaposition between the Grade 1 listed building and the Saffron Square development that's up to 44 stories in height. And now we're in Poplar Walk, and we're looking up and down the two ramps. Now, it's really important to note that the current scheme involves significant improvements and enhancements to the Poplar Walk aspect that wasn't there in the 2014 scheme. Now, this the car park here was to be retained previously, this building was to be retained, and Green Park House was outside of the application site. By bringing those in, we could have a successful integration to West Croydon, an improvement in terms of Poplar Walk. And it's also worth noting that's one of the office buildings for demolition in the background. So these ramps and associated would be removed. We're now on Wellesley Road, and we're looking down Green Park House to be demolished, and the other side of that car park, which would be demolished, to make way for Tower 5 in this location. This is looking into the eastern side of Chapel Walk, and then the existing main entrance from Wellesley Road, again with two of the office buildings for demolition. And then looking across now, so this is Meridian House and the HSBC building, with Dingle Avenue in between. These two and Electric House are outside of the application site. And we're now looking across the underpass into Dingle Avenue. Those buildings in the background would all be demolished to make way for Department Store B, and Dingle Avenue would be reconfigured and redesigned as a public space. Final photograph just to complete the circuit. This is looking down George Street back to where we started in the almshouses. So, the application itself, as I said, it's an outline parameter-based application. Now, this is to give the developer flexibility for the detailed design. Now, effectively for approval tonight are three key documents. The first is the development specification. Now, that defines the floor spaces and the uses. Secondly is the parameter plans, and those are the plans that I'm about to show you that cover aspects such as building footprint and maximum heights. And third is the design guidelines, and they establish the design principles. Now, those three taken together provide the framework of controls for the future reserve matters applications. There is one aspect for full determination tonight, and that's the external vehicular accesses, which I'll come to. So this is the development specification. It's the uses that are applied for in terms of retail, leisure, residential. That equates to indicatively between 626 and 967 units, and out of that amount could be student or hotel, community facilities, office, car parking, and that's to a maximum of 3,140 car parking spaces, and then malls and back of house. Full details of this are covered in the reports. So these are the parameter plans then for determination this evening. This first slide, just to orientate yourself, this is now Wellesley Road, and this is North End, so we've just turned it on its side. In terms of, you can see this hatched area, the majority of the site is for demolition. Importantly, the former Alders building facade is retained, as is number 5, which was that terracotta building I showed you. These grey buildings, now they are not within the completed scheme, although within the application site. They are needed for access purposes, but they would continue to trade during construction. So this is the vehicular access and circulation plan, so all in predominantly off Wellesley Road and one off Poplar Walk. So we have the proposed vehicular, which is restricted to taxis and accessible transport, as well as the existing users in terms of Electric House and the other buildings. So that's all in a northbound direction. Then there's the servicing vehicles would come in, go down to the basement and up and leave in a northern direction. And then the car park is across in this position. There's a southern entrance and exit and a northern entrance and exit. And you'll notice there is a dotted line here for intermittent usage of that from the south if there's an issue with the southern ramp. But predominantly it's trying to reduce the cars between these two locations in terms of visitors to the centre. And then the final bit here is residential. If a basement is provided for residential car parking, Poplar Walk is one way. It would be in and down and out in this location. This is pedestrian routes now. Crucial to the scheme and its success is this 24-hour east-west route. That's in blue, so that it's 24 hours. These hatched lines show the area in which that route must be located, so it can move slightly. There are minimum widths, so this route has to be a minimum of 12 metres in width. This is the main north-south route, so from Poplar Walk down to George Street, and that varies between 10 metres in width and 5 metres in width. Then we have east to west routes through the former Alders building and the arcade, and then through Department Store B into Dingle Avenue. And then we have Chapel Walk entrance in here through, and then a possible route through Department Store A. This is a really important slide in terms of the footprint of the building. So the blue line, if I just draw it around this, is the maximum building footprint as it follows through. And then the green line is the minimum footprint. So if we take this point on Poplar Walk as an example, the maximum that it could be built to is here, and it could be anywhere within this range to the minimum footprint here. And the same follows as you go round. A couple of important points to make out are there's a minimum of 1,000 square metre public realm space on Poplar Walk, and minimum 250 square metres at either end of the Galleria, and 500 square metres within Whitgift Court. This is the maximum heights that could be built to, noting that there is 5 residential towers. In terms of the heights are done as AOD, so above ordnance datum. Effectively, the lowest is 68, rising to 95 at the cinema, 100 on the car park, and then the towers range between the lowest 146, now that equates to approximately 25 stories, the highest being 194, and that equates to approximately 40 stories. Just want to also mention these hatched areas which show the potential for glass canopies over those threshold spaces. Well, what does that actually look like? I thought this slide was useful to help visualise that and the potential mass in the maximum scenario. It's worth just saying that centre tower on the site at the moment is 134 metres AOD. Saffron Square is 44 stories, as is on site now. This is the 2017 Lanzarote Scheme that a resolution was made a couple of committees ago. This is up to 68 stories. And this is St Michael's that's granted but not been built out, and that's 25 stories. So it's just to show you a flavour of the other quite tall buildings in this particular location. Worth looking at the almshouses in particular and making reference to where these setbacks are in relation to the distances from the almshouses, and this will be made clearer later in a subsequent slide. This is the minimum parameter. So this time 67 rising to 86, and then in this you'll note that it's 4 residential towers, all to a minimum height of 146, which is roughly 25 stories. And it's worth noting that if residential doesn't come forward in the Tower 1 location, there needs to be a retail use there to help frame the 24-hour East-West Galleria. And again, what does that look like? This is what it looks like, and you can see Tower 1 not being provided, and then the 4 at the 25 stories in effect. This shows you the uses through. The pink is predominantly retail and leisure, and the frontage purple is predominantly residential at basement, ground and above. This parameter plan shows the residential and amenity zone, so you can see this marked here as a minimum of 2,420 square metres of shared amenity and play space for the residential that has to be accessed from the towers. And there's 2 areas of 125 square metres each of publicly accessible rooftop amenity fronting onto North End. The final parameter plan is the extent of basement works. This is the existing, this is where it can be provided, and it's worth just drawing attention to the area of basement which may not be constructed immediately around the almshouses. And then this slide just shows the works within the conservation area, the retention of the facades, demolition, creation of basements and minor works as defined in the description of the development, which I won't repeat now. These are the aspects for full consideration tonight. As I mentioned, the external vehicular accesses. So this is Poplar Walk, the residential in and out. This is the northern car park entrance. So in with intermittent in from the south and then out to the north. And then moving down we have Dingle Avenue for taxi drop-off and disabled parking. And then we have the servicing in and out in a northerly direction, and we have the southern car park access in and out to the south. So the third component I mentioned for determination is the design guidelines. These cover street frontages, public routes, residential, car parking, secondary elevations, roofs, landscaping and meanwhile code. Now I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought it was worth drawing attention to one which I know is important to members based on the pre-app conversations, and that's around the Galleria in particular, the 24-hour east-west route. You can't read all of that, but I'm going to summarise the key bits. It's really just to show you what those documents look like in terms of their detail, in terms of how they work. But the key bits to point out from this particular page is that it has to be open 24 hours a day, has to have a minimum ground floor width of 12 metres and 16 metres above that. The roof has to be glazed as far as possible, a minimum of 60% of the floor area of the clear glazed at roof level. That's shown here. There's a limitation on the number of bridges that can cut across it, and there's controls over a potential event space over that ground floor mall. And then carrying on, there is a requirement for the floor finishes to be a continuation of the external public realm through that Galleria. And the doors would be there to need to promote visual connection through the site as far as possible. So factoring those three elements together, the developer has come up with an illustrative scheme. Now this is one possible interpretation of the development specification, the parameter plans and the design guidelines. It's not for determination tonight, it's for illustrative purposes only. But it is important to note that this scheme is based on the maximum residential parameter. Now this is a photograph of the model. The model is over in the corner there by the door. At the end of my presentation, members will give you 5 minutes to have a look at the model. If you could please save any questions for when you return to your seats, so that everyone in the chamber can hear your questions and our responses, that would be greatly appreciated. So this is the view from the north, looking down Wellesley Road. So this is Tower 5, this is St Michael's, so you have North End and Wellesley Road. And then this is from the south, so again looking up you can see George Street, department store B, and then the car parking access, and then the 5 residential towers. This is the key illustrative floor plans. I'm not going to take you through them in detail, but it's worth just drawing out at basement is predominantly servicing and energy. Moving up, we have residential fronting onto Wellesley Road with the car park accesses. We have primarily food and beverage, which is the orange on the threshold spaces, with retail centrally located within. Department store A would be in this position and department store B in this position. As you move up through the building, potential cinema coming in this position, and then car parking immediately behind the residential towers. As I say, this is the illustrative scheme. It's not for determination tonight. And then this is how that could be presented from Wellesley Road. So you can see this is Electric House, this is the HSBC building, this is Meridian House, so Dingle Avenue. This is department store B with car parking and plant, the vehicular access up to the car park, towers 1 to 5, the 24-hour east-west route with retail integrated into the base of the towers, the second car park ramp, the potential view through to department store A, and then the relationship of Tower 5 to Poplar Walk and St Michael's. If I just draw you into Dingle and the 24-hour route, that is what Dingle Avenue could look like as a visual representation of department store B, and that is what it could look like in terms of the 24-hour route through with the 5 residential towers in this position. We've jumped over now to North End. So this is the potential replacement M&S building, Chapel Walk entrance, 24-hour Galleria with buildings to either side, Grammar School Yard. You can see the retained orders building, and in the background we have the potential cinema areas, car parking, plant, and the 5 residential towers. We've just zoomed in on that Galleria to see how that could look in terms of the glazed space and those buildings to either side. And that shows you in a visual form. And then there's a rendered image of that current proposal. And you can see here the external spaces on the roof space that would be publicly accessible to either side, and the sense of openness and the glazing within the roof. And then this is Grammar School Yard, so these are those 2 retained buildings that I showed you in one of the earlier photos. This is the existing entrance into the Whitgift Centre as it sits today. This is the George Street view. In realistic terms, this isn't a view you would ever actually see, because if you're on George Street, it's obviously a large amount of this is screened by the existing George Street properties, but it's important that this is presented. You can see this is the retained white terracotta building. This is where buildings would be demolished and those elements would be set back, and then this is retained. In the background you can see the building rising, potential cinema, department store with parking and residential beyond. Just zooming in on that Whitgift Court, this is what that could look like in reality at ground floor level. So these are those 2, that's the white terracotta building, that's the other. These would be new flank treatments controlled through the design guidelines, and this would be a minimum of 500 square metres threshold space. This would link through to the South Mall in this position. And then the final side is the Poplar Walk side, which is significantly improved from the previous scheme in terms of bringing the M&S building and the Green Park House into the scheme now. You can see this would be Tower 5 up to this height. Then we have the department store A. This is the northern end of the north-south route, and then the replacement building for the Marks and Spencers as it steps down to the scale of North End. And this then shows a visual representation of that. So that's the Grade 1 listed building. That is the existing Saffron Square, 44 stories, and this is potential Tower 5 and the active uses that could be provided in terms of that public space. And it's really important that this is set back in terms of the existing M&S building is set much further forward. So providing this 1,000 square metres of space is a real positive. And that gives a view as you turn the corner very slightly looking down North End in terms of how that corner could be treated. I'm just going to show you two sections which I think are really important. This is directly through the 24-hour east-west route. The previous scheme was level all the way through and there were steps at Wellesley Road. Now on this scheme, by raising the height slightly, we have completely level access in through from Wellesley Road up to the north-south route, and then there is a very shallow gradient that falls down to North End. So effectively it's all now step-free. That wasn't the case on the previous scheme. And then this is just a section through the north-south, so we have Poplar Walk all the way through to Whitgift Court and George Street. The final slides I'm going to show you relate to the really important heritage assets in relation to the Grade 1 and the Grade 2 listed buildings. Now each of these slides shows 4 images, the existing, the top left, with the minimum parameter, with the maximum parameter, and then the maximum parameter with consented schemes. So this slide obviously shows the view from North End and George Street. This building, Centre Tower, comes out, and these elements behind are also removed. So this is the minimum scenario, minimum parameter scenario. This is the maximum parameter scenario, and this is with with Lansdowne Road, the 2012 consent. This isn't the 2017 resolution to grant, which is actually slightly higher, but that hasn't actually been formally determined yet. So this is the 2012 consent. It's worth, you can draw out, you can see the structure here, and you can see 2 of the residential towers and the department store B in the background. This is a really important view moving into the arms houses now. So again, Centre Tower and this element is all removed. So this is the minimum scenario, and this is the maximum scenario with the consented Lansdowne Road from 2012. It's just really important to remember that earlier slide I showed you of the maximum parameter and where these setbacks take place. So this element here is in exactly the same position as all of this particular element. So it's reduced, and you then get this as clear with views through. This element is approximately 80 metres away, and this element is approximately 200 metres away. And then obviously through the design guidelines, all of these elements will be designed to a high standard. So the overall conclusion in terms of this is less than substantial harm. Moving up to the second Grade 1 listed building, that's St Michael and All Angels. So again, this is the existing arrangement with Green Park House that would be removed. You can just make out the yellow line of Tower 5 here. As I say, what's really important is the buildings step back in terms of that Grade 1 listed building, and obviously we're removing the ramps and having a more rationalised solution that works better in terms of that heritage asset. This is the maximum scenario where the building can come slightly further forward than the minimum, but still well set back from the existing. And then this factors in the St Michael's consented 25-storey towers, and obviously we have Saffron Square immediately behind where this photograph is taken, so it's fair to say there are already tall buildings and in terms of the relationship to that Grade 1 listed building. And now we've just gone over to Station Road, so we're looking across West Croydon bus station. So this is the existing arrangement. This is the minimum scenario, so you can't see anything above the ridge. And then this is Tower 5 and the residential moving beyond. And then this is the maximum scenario, so you can still see the spires breaking through. And then this is with the St Michael's scheme, which is, say, is a 25-storey tower here. So the conclusion in terms of this aspect of the scheme as well is less than substantial harm. The final view then is from George Street, looking across. So this is the Grade 2 listed electric house. And you can see in the minimum scenario you can't see anything other than the towers. And then in the maximum scenario you start to see the car park. And then the towers are obviously higher. The overall conclusion, in terms of this aspect, it has a positive impact on the setting of electric house. And the overall conclusion on heritage is less than substantial harm. Now, this less than substantial harm is outweighed by the substantial public benefits of the scheme. And they are covered in the report, and I will quickly surmise them. So between 6,700 and 7,000 full-time jobs, during the construction phase, up to nearly 3,000 in phase 1 and 200 in phase 2. Significant investment in training and employment, programmes for support and engagement with local young people, public realm benefits, total investment of over 1.4 billion within the town centre, a significant number of residential units, indicatively up to 967, 20% affordable housing, indicatively up to 193, a net increase of up to around £20 million per year in business rates, 50% of which can be retained locally through the growth zone, community infrastructure levy contributions, new homes bonus, 2 new anchor stores, the potential for an element of student and hotel use, and a step-free 24-hour east-west pedestrian route. I will leave you with this slide, which is a nighttime view, so you can clearly make out the Alders facade with the arcade, the grammar school yard as existing, the new 24-hour east-west route with a threshold, Chapel Walk, the replacement M&S building, and the 5 towers with the cinema block and car parking with amenity deck on the top, and department store B, and then the relationship through to George Street. The recommendation, Chair, is to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ross. And also, whilst Helen wasn't speaking, Helen Fennell wasn't speaking tonight, thank you both of you for all the work you've done on the massive paper that it took to describe this scheme. I know the whole team have been working very hard on this, so thank you. Thank you for a presentation too. Okay then, I suspect there'll be a few questions at least on this one. So, oh, sorry. We're going to go see the model first. Yes, we have a slight break. And please do reserve any questions for when we get back to our seats rather than over at the model. Thank you. Okay, everybody. That was very helpful having the model to look at there. So thanks for the applicants for bringing that in. So questions. Who'd like to kick off? Councillor Audsley.
Thank you, Chair. So we have before us an application entitled Whitgift Shopping Centre. So first question for me is Westfield Stratford, Westfield Shepherd's Bush. Can we assume Westfield Croydon?
Well, we have got a Westfield developer on board with Hammerson. As you recall, we haven't assessed or agreed with the developer the name for it as of yet, and that was something that came up in one of the pre-application discussions, and that hasn't been agreed as yet. But the developer who is putting forward this application tonight, it's a partnership between Westfield and Hammerson.
I think it's right. We did actually raise this before in the in one of the pre-apps, and I think one of the positive things we can take from the name of the organisation that's put this forward is it's Croydon Limited Partnership. So at least they've got the Croydon name in there. I think it's really important. I don't think we can actually, though, secure that, sadly, through the planning consent. But I think it's clear we would hope and encourage the applicant to do that. Okay. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have a few questions. Shall I sort of put a couple in, sort of go through? The first one was on the car park element. I think I know, but I just wanted to check that we've got two entrances to car parks, sort of north and south, that they're linked internally, so that if you come in one, you can exit through the other and vice versa. So we're just checking that. And the residential element, we've seen, and the model shows the residential amenity strip running across the top of the car parks, but one of the drawings seemed to show the car park being on top. So I just wanted to check that the resi amenity space is sitting on top of the car park. And then the other issue with car parks was Poplar Walk with the residential access. That will only be one way in and quite a route round, I think, for residential. So I just wanted to check, are there any plans to change Poplar Walk's one-way aspects at any point? If I can start with those.
I'll take the first one regarding the car parking, if I may. Yes, the car park is physically connected across the top of the development. So yes, it is a continuous car park.
Can I just come up? Does the amenity deck sit over the top of that, or is it intermingled with the cars, for example? I mean,
no.
Not.
The residential amenity deck sits on top, and you would only be able to get to it from the residential towers themselves. You wouldn't be able to access it from the car park. It'd be completely separate. And in terms of the Poplar Walk residential access, that's shown on the plans as the basement is one possible location for the residential car parking, which is disabled parking only. There aren't any proposals to change Poplar Walk from being one-way to two-way, so anyone wishing to access that car park would have to go round through the one-way portion, enter the site, and on their way out they would only be able to exit towards Wellesley Road.
And it's important just to note that the developer is not committing to a residential basement. So they could provide the residential disabled spaces that are required within the upper car park. So that isn't an option. That is an option. And also it's worth just saying that it's 10% of the overall number of units in terms of spaces. So in terms of numbers of spaces that we're talking about here, if it is provided off Poplar Walk, indicatively you're looking between 60 and 96 spaces. So it's relatively low in terms of potential for volume.
And just going back to the fact the car parks are linked internally, it does mean you can come in one entrance and go out another entrance?
You could potentially do that. We're putting a condition on about a car park management plan, which would be submitted to us for approval, which would resolve all of those issues. The intention is if you're coming in from the south, you're most likely to want to go back out the south, so you would use the southern entrance, but there would be potential that if you came in through the south entrance, you could potentially go out of the north entrance if you wanted to go out in that direction.
Thank you very much. Coming on to the leisure offer, there was mention of the cinema. Will there be more to the leisure offer? I mean, other Westfields, you have bowling and things going on. Is that the plan to have a larger leisure offer here?
So the floor space that is proposed is purely leisure floor space. The application itself doesn't say there will definitely be a cinema. That's shown in the indicative scheme, and that is potentially one use that could be accommodated within the leisure floor space, but that doesn't preclude other uses which fall within the leisure use class being accommodated on site as well. We'll find out exactly what the proposal is when we come to the reserve matters applications.
And will there be control on the leisure offer being a family offer? I mean, I know there are casinos at other places, or could it be we end up with the leisure offer being adults only?
We wouldn't get that level of detail of what their proposal would be until the reserve matters application, so it would be within the use class that we are granting permission for, which is an acceptable use class within town centres.
May I go on, or...?
But you may, apologies if you can come on to this one, but in terms of a casino, is there scope within the use class that's proposed at the moment to include a casino, or is that something that would have to come very specifically back to us? I'm sure it's not necessarily something we'd want to see.
Well, a casino does fall within the leisure use class. But whether that's an acceptable use or not, we will, in terms of how it's laid out and what the hours would be, that would be for us to determine at reserve matters stage. At this stage, that's not being proposed, but it's just purely leisure floor space. We approve it on the basis of the use class that's approved, which in planning policy terms is an acceptable use class in a town centre location. So at outline stage, we don't have that level of detail, so we couldn't make an assumption that is going to be included in the final scheme. That's the level of detail that comes forward at reserve matters.
Yes, and I'd just like to reassure members that applications for reserve matters, if members so require, and I'm sure you do wish to see them, come back to committee for your approval or determination. It wouldn't be left with officers, so that you would get a look at those different uses within a leisure class to make your both your feelings known at pre-application presentations for reserve matters and indeed when the application came for determination.
I think that let's get on record now. I think we would definitely, I would assume that the whole committee would agree, and we obviously need to decide on that a bit later on in the meeting, but we would expect to see all reserve matters come back on this incredibly important application. Could we just have a point on the legal matter in terms of the use of the potential leisure?
Chair, on that, I just wanted to add that obviously there is a separate regime in relation to casinos which would be dealt with by the licensing regime, so there is that control as well that the Council does have, which does sit outside of planning, obviously, but there is that additional control.
Councillor Perry?
Thank you very much. I just want to come on to the parameters issue. I mean, clearly, I totally understand why we have a parameters scheme. I just wanted to understand how that's managed and how that's determined. Because in some areas, particularly at Poplar Walk, the minimums and maximums, particularly on public realm, make a huge difference. That's one of the areas that sort of leaps out as a real big change on the parameters. And so really it's about the management and determination of those parameters. Is that purely with the developer? Is it in consultation with the council? How will that work?
So the plans that are before you show maximum and minimum parameters, and the scheme that comes forward at reserve matters will be either at the maximum or the minimum or somewhere in between. If you're taking footprint, for example, those are clearly shown on the parameter plans that have been presented to us, so we know exactly where the maximum and the minimum will be. As officers, we've looked at those plans, made an assessment, and determined that those variations are acceptable to us, and that is what is presented to you tonight to determine.
So assuming we bring reserve matters back to committee, we would then actually see what that final outcome will be?
That's correct, yes.
one last one. Sorry, I'm hogging this, but one last one was on the 24-hour access. I mean, I think this has been something, the east-west route, that's been really important to the committee and to the council, I think. Originally on the consented scheme, we had the open street, and we now have a covered street. I just wanted to understand the control around the 24-hour access. It's being offered, and we're told that it will be external materials being used through the Galleria, so it gives that external feel when you're in there. And do we have total control on that remaining 24-hour access, or could the developer down the line come back and ask to secure those entrances and remove that 24-hour access?
So the proposal is for it to be 24-hour use. We are attaching a planning condition to ensure that it remains as 24-hour use, and that's what it would be. It's envisaged as, whilst it's got a cover and doors at either end, it is a space between two buildings that would have 24-hour access. And if we don't see any reason why that would change, the condition would ensure that it would stay like that.
So you'd need to bring forward another planning application to remove that condition, presumably, in the future?
Which we would resist.
And on the point about the use, the 24-hour use of the Galleria, presumably the management of that space and what can happen in that space is entirely down to the control of the applicant or whoever's managing the centre. And so, for example, if we finished a planning committee rather late one night and went down there with a bottle of sparkling wine, would we be able to sit in the Galleria until 2 o'clock in the morning, or would there be sort of very strict and specific rules on what you can do in there and what you can't do?
Okay, so it would be open on a 24-hour basis. Obviously, the developer would have its own security, and we're also, through the conditions, requiring an estate management plan, so we would know the type of controls that they would be imposing in that location.
So a level of reasonableness could be introduced for that, and equally, clearly it can't be a space for anybody just to do anything in whatever time, but there is a level of reasonableness that we can actually apply to that through the development of the scheme.
Yeah, so obviously we would approve the estate management plan, and the developer would likely have its own security provision within that space, but it would still be accessible 24 hours a day.
And I just remind Chair what Sean's just said about licensing. So for any premises selling alcohol, there would be licensing restrictions in place as well.
Ross.
Thank you, Chair. A casino use would actually be sui generis, so it's not actually D2, so it isn't actually within the consent. The only sui generis use proposed here is for student accommodation, so the casino couldn't come forward in terms of the reserve matters because it's not a D2 use, it's sui generis.
Okay, so thank you. That's very helpful. Right, now I've seen Councillor Khan, Councillor Kabir, Councillor Audsley and Councillor Wright in that order. Obviously, I'll bring other people in a bit later on. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. My questions may be a little premature at this stage, given the status of the application, but what I would like to hear is an expansion on the opportunities that are presented within the 106 money budgets. And the other element that I would like a little more on is the idea of some therapeutic outside play provision for children while their parents are spending their millions in these stores.
So in terms of the Section 106, did you have any specific areas that you wanted me to...
Sorry, like an opportunity for this to work. I just would like an expansion on the ideas that have been around as to what Section 106 monies could be spent on to provide for those additional kind of resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just answer the first part of your question while Helen looks for the specifics? But in terms of Section 106, it is very specific, the uses that it could be used for in terms of the mitigating the impacts of the development. So Helen, as case officer, will just provide a detailed list of what the Section 106 requirements are, but they are very specific and already identified in terms of mitigating impacts.
Okay, so the committee report, starting at paragraph 9.383, sets out the details of the Section 106 requirements. Some are financial points, some are non-financial matters. So I'll just take them, take you through them. So we have a schedule in relation to TV mitigation to ensure that anyone who lives in the vicinity of the site, if their TV signal is affected by the tall buildings that are put in, then they are that issue is resolved for them. We have a schedule in relation to public art to encourage to require the applicant to provide a strategy for public art within the scheme. We have a restriction on parking permits for future residents of the scheme to prevent them from gaining permits for on-street parking. We have a schedule so we can ensure the quality of the architects going forward on the Reserve Matters application. We have a schedule that requires the applicant to link into any district heating scheme should that come forward prior to this scheme being built out. We have a schedule in relation to public realm. We are requiring by condition the developer to enter into highways agreements to undertake specific highway works. And that will include a reasonable endeavours obligation to secure a pedestrian route through Department Store A. Affordable housing is also secured through the Section 106 agreement, and that is at a minimum level of 20%, with those affordable units being provided as discount market rent units. Now, those units would be split with 40% of them matching London living rent levels and the remaining 60% achieving rent levels of 80% below market rent. We, through the transport section of the Section 106, are requiring the highways works to Wellesley Road, and there's also an obligation on the developer to provide a financial contribution towards a car club for future residents. The reason we're asking for the car club contribution is because the only car parking that's being provided for residents in the scheme is for disabled blue badge spaces. There's no other car parking because of its high accessibility level. We're also requiring a financial contribution of £2.5 million for the local employment and training strategy, which will mitigate the impact of the development and includes things like job brokerage, using Croydon Works, that sort of thing. And that is for both the construction period and the initial operational period of the development as well. There is also a financial contribution to go towards air quality mitigation measures. There is a financial contribution towards reducing carbon emissions, and there's also a commitment that if the developer doesn't proceed, then public realm works can be undertaken on North End. So that's a brief canter through the 106 for you.
Nothing like a day nursery for children, for the workers on the site.
Well, there is a requirement within the scheme for just over 1,000 square metres of community floor space. Now, a nursery would fall within that use class, but obviously at this stage of the scheme, we don't have that level of detail, but that could potentially come forwards. In terms of children's play space, that would be included within the rooftop amenity deck for the residents of the scheme.
Sorry, I'm talking about shoppers. It's not uncommon in some countries for those kind of provisions to be where the major shopping areas are. right? That's what I'm really looking for and asking about.
That's not something that's specifically proposed, but it may come forward.
Wish list.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that something that we could include within the condition regarding sort of the internal sort of use of the spaces, and also sort of integrate into the public art, for example? So it's a child-friendly environment. Not all public art has to be something on the wall that everybody admires. It could be things that kids can climb over and that kind of stuff. So could we softly sort of introduce those kind of child-friendly aspects into the controls we've actually got?
Yes, Chair. Through the pre-application discussions on the reserved matters, we could take on board committee's comments and thoughts and see if we can push the developer towards a much more child-friendly environment. And also bear in mind, we will be bringing reserved matters back here in terms of pre-application discussions, and I'm sure members will make their views very clear to the applicant on those matters.
Okay, thank you. We now have Councillor Kabir.
Thank you. I've got two questions. First one is the affordable homes, where are they going to will be situated within these 5 towers? And second one is, in the community space, will be their faith room, like we have experienced in Shepherd Bush or in Stratford, Westfield?
Okay, so at this stage, we don't have specific details of where within the residential towers the affordable housing will be located, but discount market rented units within a build-for-rent scheme, the way they're designed, they can be tenure blind, so the affordable units could be pepper-potted throughout the scheme, and there's no reason why that can't take place. So that's something we will be discussing with the applicant. And in terms of a faith room or something of that nature, that could fall within the community floor space that's proposed, but obviously as this is outline and parameter based, we don't have that level of detail as yet.
Would we anticipate, in terms of the way that the affordable housing comes forward, that it would come forward in the same proportions as the rest of the development comes forward? So, in other words, it isn't all in the last tower, but it would actually come forward if the first, say, Tower 2 or Tower 1 was in the first phase, that actually 20% of what's delivered in that first phase would actually be affordable.
Yeah, well, that would be our intention, to bring it forward proportionately on a tower-by-tower basis. We wouldn't want it left to all be in the last tower.
And we can secure that through the conditions that we've got already.
We'd secure that through the Section 106 agreement.
Fine, thank you very much. Councillor Audsley and then Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. So just to build on the kind of affordable housing discussion, I think if we look at our policy, we have a minimum of 15% in the town centre, and if it's, forgive me, if we have, if more, in terms of our kind of total contribution to affordable housing, if more is required within the kind of broader opportunity, we aim for a kind of 30% total for affordable housing. Is that correct?
At the moment, it is a 50% minimum within the opportunity area, and with a 15% minimum, we have worked hard with the applicant in terms of viability to see what is what is reasonably acceptable, the maximum reasonable amount that's acceptable, and 20% at this point in time is considered to be reasonable and deliverable. You'll be aware that the Mayor's SPG on affordable housing requires review mechanisms, 3 review mechanisms, and these will be part and parcel of the Section 106 agreements to ensure that we can, if there's any uplift, then that minimum, the 20% can rise up to a maximum of 50%.
And could the, if through a review mechanism it's identified that more affordable housing could be brought forward, is there scope for that to be not necessarily only in the numbers, but also in the sort of tenure, the level of affordability for those units? Is that there's a scope there for that to be included?
Potentially there is the scope. However, I would advise against it in this, for instance, in terms of the complexity of what members are wanting, which is entirely laudable requirement. We have negotiated of the 20% affordable housing that we have a mix of 60-40 London living rents and discount market rents. However, with this particular application and the need to get the Section 106 resolved, including the affordable housing requirements and the mechanisms around it that require detailed discussion both with the applicant and the GLA, this is extremely time-consuming. And to go forward and to sort out review mechanisms, customised review mechanisms around that would be extremely time-consuming. And there is a time deadline issue with this particular application. Bear in mind that we need to issue the decision notice once the Section 106 has been agreed. We then have to work with the developer around the CPO and the land drawdown, where we have the deadline of September 2018 on it. So I would advise that we didn't overcomplicate the Section 106 any further than it already is complex with 3 review mechanisms, bearing in mind that we really do need to get this Section 106 signed as soon as possible. And if you consider how long it took for the last Section 106 to be signed for the previous consent, so recall that it was about this time of year, November, that the decision was made, the Section 106, and it was a much simpler Section 106 in terms of there was no sort of mechanisms around review mechanism in the GLA, that it took until February to be decided. Now, we really do need to get the Section 106 signed. I'd like to see it signed this side of Christmas so that we can proceed with the CPO and land drawdown. And I just advise members of the time delay and the difficulty it will be to get all that sorted and get on with land drawdown as well.
On the carrying on the point about affordable, in terms of the London living rent, do we know at this stage what the likely level of that is going to be in terms of what percentage would it be of the market rent?
Overall, as a rough rule of thumb, at this point in time, it would be 66% of market rents.
So that's pretty much the same, if not exactly the same, as sort of social rent levels.
I believe it depends on the sort of typology. So, for instance, 3-bed units, you get a much greater discount than you would against a studio or 1-bedroom flat. So it is pegged with residents' income per ward and also taking consideration the size of the unit. But it is considered by the GLA to be a product that they favour very much in that it allows people on sort of low to medium incomes to be able to pay a rent and still save up for a property. So we see it as a good product going forward, and we're satisfied that we have got a good percentage of the affordable housing on sort of what is a relatively affordable rent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just to build on the Section 106 and kind of contribution to air pollution. I guess my mind is, look, we've got 3,000 car parking spaces coming to our town, haven't we? Which, if we look at the big picture, is quite significant. Respectful people want to drive, but be interested to kind of hear how we might, kind of how the car parking will be managed, or indeed kind of incentivised to support people not driving, or changing behaviour as the market moves in terms of driving, etc., etc. So I know those probably are big questions, but it'd be good to kind of think about those. Almost perhaps the bigger picture around air pollution is indeed how this is all managed, rather than a contribution through Section 106.
Okay, so in terms of air quality, we are securing for both the residential and the commercial element a committed sum within the 106 agreement, which uses the Greenwich formula to work out the amount, and money received from that would go towards air quality initiatives within the borough. We also have a condition being applied to the permission requiring a low emissions strategy. the site itself is obviously in a very accessible location, so it is highly accessible by both tram, train, bus. So there are alternatives for people not to use their car, but we do recognise that with the scale of this town centre retailing, there are going to be people who do wish to drive, so we have to accommodate the car park itself. And we feel that with the controls that we've imposed through the Section 106 and the conditions, which we've also got one, which is a car parking management plan, we think that that's sufficient and acceptable to us.
Thank you. Just to explore the question, would we ever have the power to say you can't come and drive here today? A serious question in the sense that we want a public event in our town centre, or we, choose to actually say, this Sunday will be a car-free day in, Croydon. I just put out the idea that, we're locking ourselves into significant times for the future. So, would that be possible?
I think that's outside the remit of this planning application. If there was, for example, a larger event, then we would look at that in the round. But what we have to determine tonight is the proposal in front of us, and whilst that wouldn't preclude those sorts of things taking place, the proposal itself does include a car park, and we feel that we've got sufficient controls to address that with the air quality issue.
Thank you. Can I just want to add two important ingredients to that? The first is the previous consent, so that granted 3,500 spaces. The current scheme before us is a reduction in that. It's 3,140 spaces, so that's an important material consideration. And the second point is around the OAPF, so the Opportunity Area Planning Framework, and the desire to rationalise the car parking across the town centre, and that is in part what this scheme is looking to do.
I suppose we might at least hope that some stage in the future, one of the issues that will be coming forward, maybe not to this committee, but somewhere, would be, what do we do with all these empty parking spaces because everybody's coming by public transport? But that's probably a little way off yet. But that should be, where we're trying to push people generally, and who knows, 10, 20, 30 years' time. I understand they've got a 250-year lease on this. What are people going to be driving then, So, anyway, okay, moving on. Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chairman. The report mentions that a sequential test is not needed. And I was going to ask the officers if they can explain that, because it would seem to me that we need to look at surrounding Sutton, Reigate or whatever. And I would have thought sequential test was a necessary thing.
Okay, so we looked at the fact that the uses that are being proposed are town centre uses, and they are being proposed in a town centre location, which is consistent with policy. We do have a small area of the retailing which is outside of the primary shopping area. However, in our emerging policy, the entire retailing as put forward by this proposal falls within the primary shopping area, and there's been no objection to that policy as it's come through the local plan process. So the fact that we've got town centre uses in a town centre location, we didn't feel that a sequential test was necessary. Whilst I appreciate that this is a large scheme that will have a large draw and could potentially have an impact on other centres, this is going to be a very different offer than what is currently available in smaller centres, Reigate, Red Hill, which, to be fair, are some distance away. And we have, assessed this fully and felt that that was the correct approach. It's consistent with the approach that we took on the application last time.
Okay. I think the report also mentions that no trade would take place before public realm had been completed. Does that mean 100% of public realm? I'm just thinking that in the interest of a few years' time getting it absolutely forward to trade, and I have to wait for one particular part of public realm. Does that mean the whole public realm has to be completed before anything happens?
There is a range of mitigation set out, which is under the Section 278. In addition, there is public infrastructure measures. These will all be tied up in the Section 106 and are specified within there. There will also be a clause within the Section 106 that requires the completion of those particular measures to be undertaken before the centre opens.
So we wouldn't be in a situation where we're waiting for the last thing to happen before anyone's allowed to trade. That could possibly be a possibility.
Well, all the, as I said, the Section 278 works and the public infrastructure measures need to be undertaken because they are seen to be necessary for this and other developments within the town centre. But we would be working with the developer to make sure that these were all undertaken in a timely manner. And with many of the works to be down to the council, then we will be obviously, we will be in control of it. And we also work very closely with TfL. So I wouldn't like to think there'll be any scenario where there's a couple of curbstones that go in and the whole place is held up. I'm sure we wouldn't be in that scenario at all.
Okay, I've now got Councillor Wimborne, Councillor Chatterjee, Councillor Treacle-Lawler and Councillor Prince in that order, and then we'll move on to hear from the objector and the applicant. Okay, so Councillor Wimborne.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that there's only 5% three-bedroom properties to be developed. It seems a great shame that we're not going to get families moving into the town if there's no three-bedroom. And my second question is there any likelihood of a park and ride scheme supporting this development? Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the number of three-bed units that are proposed, that is entirely consistent with the requirements of the OAPF for the retail core, and we consider that level of provision within the retail core is appropriate. It's also consistent with the planning permission that was granted in 2014.
The developer is required to prepare and submit a travel plan for approval, and we've talked to the developer in the past about optimising the use of the existing park and ride facilities that exist south of Croydon into Surrey at the majority or a large number of rail stations. That's there provided for the weekday peak, with presumably and hopefully capacity at the weekend when peak demand will be arising for this development. So we hope through the travel plan that we can encourage the developer to look at some ways of incentivising use of that existing park and ride infrastructure.
Councillor Chatterjee.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions. One's on cycling and the other one's on electric charging points. On the east-west route, the 24-hour route, if I understand correctly, it would be possible for individuals to wheel their bikes but not ride them. What's the position in terms of wheeling bikes for any of the kind of north-south internal routes, which would be more arcade-like, I suppose? The second question is in terms of, is it too early to say what level of electric charging points are likely to be made available in the actual parking areas?
Okay, so in terms of being able to wheel your bike through the east-west route, that's correct. We haven't had a discussion about the north-south route, which would be more mall-like. We don't have any specific condition ensuring that people are able to do that. It's probably unlikely that people would want to, given the fact that we envisage, the scheme to be quite busy, and you would have North End or Wellesley Road, which run parallel to it, which would enable a north-south route through the town. So going north-south through the north-south mall probably wouldn't be the most efficient way of cyclists getting through the town at that point. In terms of the electric vehicle charging points, we are suggesting the imposition of a planning condition requiring 5% of parking spaces to have them installed, with a further 15% passive provision.
Thanks very much. Just in terms of the cyclists being customers too, of course not every cyclist will want to necessarily park their bike and then come all the way in.
That may be the case. We obviously, as I said before, will have an estate management plan, and I would imagine that this factor would form part of the estate management plan, and we would be able to discuss that further with the applicant. But there is a proposal which is controlled by condition for parking spaces in and around the site as well.
I think a cycle hub was mentioned. Is that something that is going to be secured, or is something that's aspirational? I mean, when I say cycle hub, it's sort of a place where you can securely park your bike and go away and shop for the rest of the day, and someone will fix your puncture, and you can have a cup of coffee when you get there and have a shower or whatever, all those sorts of things. Is that something that's going to be delivered through the scheme, or is it an aspiration?
Okay, so we have a condition requiring a travel plan, and within the condition itself, it's asking for a cycle hub option to be explored, and we would pursue that with the applicant. But obviously, it's a bit of a commercial decision, because you would need to get an operator to come in and do that, and obviously they will only do that if it's the correct commercial decision for them to make. But through the travel plan discussion, through that condition, we would be encouraging a cycle hub.
Thank you. And Councillor Trackers-Lawler?
Thank you very much, Chair. Given that there are going to be a very large number of parking spaces, is there any scope to work with retailers to say if any consumer spends a certain amount of money, they would get money off of parking?
Well, as I said before, we're requiring by condition a car park management plan. That might be something that would be encouraged, but as we're seeking the use of public transport rather than cars, that may not be the case, but it's not something we could strictly control through the planning process.
And Councillor Prince.
I have to say up front that I do regret that so much of this is still undecided. I appreciate with a huge scheme like this you have to very often go with outline permission and have a lot of stuff reserved for later. But after all this time, not even to know whether you're going to have 4 towers or 5. Anyway, sticking with the towers, with the residential. Firstly, although obviously we regret that 20% is not more, and while I hear everything that Heather said about the need to crack on with the Section 106 agreement and so forth, I wonder, is there any chance we could interpret that affordable housing 20% as actually, 20.06% rather than 19.96%, because I've done some back-of-envelope calculations, and 193 affordable units out of, this is the maximum, out of 967, is 19.96%. Whereas just one more is actually 20%. So I'll leave that with you. Can you say something about the style of the towers? The model, obviously, is just indicative. They're just very blockish. Are they likely to be the same, or are they likely to have a variety of style between them? And going back to affordable housing, can you confirm that that they will be for rent in perpetuity? Because it's not a tenure that we see very often here. And a different subject now. I'm sorry to see the loss of the Marks and Spencer, the white marble bit facade. Is there any way that the facade, not the out-of-date retail structure, but the facade could be preserved like they're doing with the alders at the other end? And then I think, lastly, on these vehicle accesses, I think the paper implies that both accesses will be new crossings of the Wellesley Road. Now, I drive down there quite a lot. There's about 4 or 5 sets of traffic lights already. Does this make 6 or 7? Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the towers on Wellesley Road, obviously we don't have detailed design at the moment, but there is provision within the design guidelines for those to be articulated, and obviously we will be discussing the design of those through the pre-app on the reserve matters applications, which is likely to come forward with you, so you would have the opportunity to comment on the final design of the towers themselves. Going forward, I think that there is the potential there for them to have different appearances and articulation between them, which would satisfy your request. In terms of the affordable housing, whilst it is discount market rent, which is a new type within Croydon, it would still be provided in perpetuity, and we would enshrine that within the Section 106 agreement to ensure that remains the case. In terms of the Marks and Spencer facades, with the changes that are taking place to the northern end of the site, and the fact that the building is being pulled back on the corner of Poplar Walk and North End, that means that the entire facade couldn't be retained anyway. The only way we can get the additional public realm within that area is to demolish the building. So unfortunately, we can't retain the facade if we're pulling the building back and getting the public realm in that location.
I wouldn't be asking for the Poplar Walk facade, that bit. I like the 20s style.
But with the building being pulled back, you'd lose the frontage on North End as well. Ron Burton's just going to comment on the traffic lights on Wellesley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the scheme will create new signal junctions at each of the accesses into the site. The northern access, you would have the traffic coming south at the junction with Sydenham Road, where they would be signalled for turning right into the site, and the traffic coming out would be signalled to turn left, and the traffic going north would generally go just north, but there will be a sort of fail-safe where if there are traffic queues building up, say on a Saturday peak, or there's something happens to the southern access, that you would be able to then do the left turn into the northern access coming north along Wellesley Road, but that will be controlled by a car park management plan and variable message signing to ensure that only happens in exceptional circumstances. And then at the southern entrance, you would have the signal access for the left turn into the car park and the right turn out. The whole scheme of signalised junctions along there has been modelled quite extensively with lots of consultation with Transport for London, ourselves and the transport consultants, to test the operation of all the signals. Whilst it's recognised there are some extra delays as a result of extra traffic and more signals, it does show that the queues never get to the point where it will block any junction, and on each operation of signals, any queuing traffic will clear.
Just to address Councillor Prince's first point about 20%, we will be seeking 20% by habitable rooms in the Section 106. Do bear in mind also that it's an upwards-only review mechanism as well, so we will be seeking to increase that quantum. And then just finally on the M&S point, yes, it is an attractive facade, and Helen gave you quite a bit of detail, but I mean, you know, M&S, you know, the addition of a new store would bring significant economic and regenerative benefits. In addition, the redevelopment, by pulling it back, would allow a much better gateway element to the conservation area on the corner of North End and Poplar Walk. So that could be a real beneficial element that we do think, you know, the public benefits would outweigh the negative impacts and the harm.
Yeah, thank you for that, Heather. I was worrying that the review mechanism, for the amount of affordable housing wasn't mentioned in the conditions, but so I'm very pleased to hear that it will be legally, tied down, as it were, in the Section 106 agreement. And I'm also very pleased to hear you say earlier that most of these reserve matters will come back to this committee, because I do think that's important. Thank you.
I suspect also it's probably fair to say that one or two people from the developers and their architects are probably here this evening or will be listening. So I think actually the point about maybe not necessarily preserving the actual facade, but actually looking at that facade and including elements of that kind of look and those sorts of materials into the facade may be something that they'd want to consider taking on board, given that a member of the committee has raised it. Okay, that's all the questions for now. So we've got the two people wishing to address us. Firstly, we have Mr. Crichton, who is a resident and is objecting. We've had 15 objections received for the scheme, so if Mr. Crichton would like to make his way down. And then we also have Mr. Burton, who is from the Croydon Limited Partnership, the applicants, who also wishes to speak. Both speakers have up to 5 minutes to tell us about their point of view on the scheme. As they make their way down, just to note that we had 21 letters of representation, 15 objecting, 4 supporting, which doesn't actually quite add up in terms of the maths, but and 2 comments as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. And we also, whilst he isn't actually speaking this evening, we had a referral from Ward Councillor Vinnie Mohan as well. So, Mr. Crichton, I understand you're taking the whole 5 minutes on behalf of the 3 people who originally asked to address the meeting. Is that correct? So when you're ready, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of Andrew Kennedy, who's sitting to my left, in case there are any particular questions that it would be appropriate for him to answer, and Mark Samuel, who apologises that he can't now be here because he has a commitment suddenly dumped on him to do with the Home Office. So I'm speaking on behalf of Andrew and Mark, and I have taken into account the views of other objectors and other people. The key issues are whether the details are sound, whether they address a series of major issues properly, and whether the result will be a complex of buildings and usages which will see a considerable improvement to the attractiveness of the town centre. 2 of the major issues relate to the economic viability of providing reasonably priced homes for those in need and the nature of the jobs that will be created. The developer is seeking this revised outline permission because it got rather over-enthusiastic in buying up extra land. It's offering very little in the way of benefits to the town centre. The location of the residential units moves footfall and therefore the focal point of the town away from North End onto what is really an urban motorway and not a European boulevard. North End should be our boulevard. The developer hopes that approval will give it considerable flexible negotiating powers with officers over the details, with at the moment no formal decision for democratic public accountability and scrutiny. A much more imaginative approach to this regeneration scheme would include spreading the new homes across the top of the centre in accordance with the historic living over the shop element of the town centre streets and produce a lower roof height, enabling the proposed towers to be dispensed with. Creating an extensive public green space on the route, identified as a top priority by members of the public in the Nudge Factory survey, and which could be looked after by community gardeners. Providing a major public performance, art and meeting place and fountain, e.g. at the junction of Galleria with a north-south route. providing a major leisure facility such as a swimming pool and dance studio as suggested to Westfield in 2012, and which would attract many more people into the town centre than simply another cinema which will be competing with one that we already have. Returning the former Alders building into a premier department store. Reducing conflict between pedestrians and car park traffic on Wesley Road by reconfiguring the car parks and increasing drop-off along Wesley Road, and contributing to employing local people and paying them, as is council policy, the London living wage. On behalf of Mark Samuel, who is an expert on analogue and digital reception, who raised this issue in the discussions on the 2014 scheme, its impact on reception. In relation to the issue of TV mitigation, will the Section 106 SIL agreement provide for the developer to pay the costs of mitigation measures, which he would argue, if he was here, could be far more geographically extensive than simply in the opportunity area, including the issues that will face the police, whose analogue system is closing down. The demolition and construction process will take the heart out of the town centre with a major psychological impact which could result in insecurity and unrest. Crime could increase or worse. The partnership should contribute to the cost of policing and supporting victims of crime if there is an increase through Section 106 SIL and planning conditions. Finally, under common law, committee members have to have open minds in considering applications. Your pre-existing party group, your personal and pre-existing party grouping support for the principle of the redevelopment should not predetermine how you vote tonight, nor is the advice given by the officer about time constraints relevant. The decision must be about whether this brings real substantial benefits to Croydon Town Centre and the borough as a whole. In deciding how to vote, I did set out in an email
Crichton,
to you...
I'm afraid I've given you a bit of extra time because you mentioned the earlier people you were speaking on behalf, but I'm afraid your time is now up. I'm afraid.
Well, finish one sentence.
One sentence.
I've set out in my email to you 3 detailed options that allows you either to reject, to defer with reasons, or approve with some suggested conditions.
It's a long sentence. I'm going to have to stop you there, I'm afraid.
And reserve matters being considered by this committee.
Thank you very much.
I welcome the Chairman's statement on that possibility.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we now, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind vacating the seats, thank you. And we now have Mr. Burton, who is the applicant. Mr. Burton, I'm going to give you a little bit of extra time because the gentleman before did overrun slightly.
That's all right. Chair, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of both Westfield, Hammerson and the Whitgift Foundation, I thank you for the opportunity this evening. There have been, as you've heard, a number of very critical changes to the scheme since we were last here. Most of this arose from Marks and Spencer's request for a new store, and it did open up the opportunity to change and make what I believe were very welcome changes, particularly in the area of providing a bigger plaza and facing towards West Croydon Station, which was probably, in terms of the scheme, underdeveloped before. We always said that we would come back to this committee with increased housing and an increased amount of affordable housing, and that's exactly what this scheme does. As a committee, right now you're considering this application at a time of major or seismic shift in the world of retail. the rise and development of digital opportunities, if it's not embraced by landlords and retailers through their own technology and solutions, is going to isolate them. More importantly, like the Whitgift Centre, shopping centres that have failed to invest over long periods of time are quite frankly becoming redundant, both to the occupiers and the visitors and the users of the town centre. There's an awful amount of work that has to be done here and money invested. Demographically, whilst we may not have a lot of Generation X and millennials in the room here today, there are substantial changes going on, right? Many of us in here have grown up as acquirers of assets. The next generations are more concerned with experiences and how they share those experiences and how we offer them events and what we do differently in terms of products and services and design, and that will be an incredibly important feature in making this relevant. I don't think the true benefit of this scheme, and I really mean this, is the massive investment will and should not be measured in terms of the scale of the architect and scale of the architecture of the buildings. I think ultimately it should be measured in its ability to continue to attract very large-scale investment into and around Croydon, as we've seen in many of the developments undertaken by Westfield and Hammerson. We need to change perceptions around the reasons to visit Croydon, and I think we need to understand that the social and human improvement that we will get through career opportunities, through building a community that values its assets and each other's futures is an important aspect we really haven't touched on here tonight, but it will be something that will come from this investment. In conclusion, we've got a lot to do over the coming months because we are, whilst the timescale should not influence this committee, there is a lot to be done in the next 12 months to move things forward. And very finally, I want to actually pay credit and thank a number of people here. Obviously, the officers. Over recent weeks, we've had very important cross-party support from the leader, from other councillors, from the chief executive, and also cross-party support from each of the local MPs, from the GLA, and also from Minister Greg Hands to get us through some very tricky discussions around infrastructure and housing. So I appreciate the effort and time put in by those people. With all of this in mind, I do urge the committee to make a positive recommendation so we can continue the hard work that is currently being undertaken by your officers and by our development teams. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to officers to add any further comments. They may wish to respond to some of the points that were raised, particularly the one about the TV reception and analogue radio reception. I'd just like to assure Mr Crichton, though, before I do hand over to officers, obviously members will all be making, as they always do, their own decisions based on their own understanding and review of the papers, what's been said tonight, what they have read in an extensive series of papers, including the addendum, etc. So that is the way that we make the decisions in this borough, and indeed, I dare say, every local authority, one would hope, makes their decisions based on that set standard of how planning committees operate. Heather.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to do a little summing up, since it's been quite a bit of debate this evening and some comments put forward by objectors. I'd like to say, the redevelopment of the Whitgift Centre, as I'm sure you're aware, for this entire central block within Croydon Town Centre is a huge and significant development. Indeed, it's hard to think of a similar size redevelopment within such a major town centre in recent years. And this will create complex planning considerations and careful planning judgment by members. The scheme has been long in its gestation. It has a previous consent and a CPO inquiry which precede this discussion and debate tonight. There will be objections and some negative impacts. How officers are confident that the public benefits significantly outweigh these. I will remind members, although I'm sure you're very aware, that you will need to determine the application that is before us tonight. The application, I know members are never very happy when they are parameter-based, but we feel confident that there is a number of significant controls within that. We have reserved matters, which, as members have made very clear, would like to come back to committee for further consideration at the time for their determination. We've also got further control through the parameter plans with design guidelines and development specifications. And just to give you an update on that, there was concerns or interest raised around the play space. In fact, the design guidelines do contain a commitment for play within the design guidelines. In addition, the applicant to date has engaged in a PPA with officers and significant pre-application discussions with formal committee presentations. And we've also now got the place review panel in place to bring further scrutiny on those reserved matters. So officers are satisfied that there is a high degree of engagement, and oversight will continue as we go forward with the detailed matters. In terms of the public benefits from this scheme, This scheme brings significant regeneration benefits and will create that long-awaited step change in Croydon Town Centre and indeed the wider borough, not only from the massive physical, economic and social improvements arising from the redevelopment of this central site, but also for its catalytic effect it would have on the wider town centre. These proposals would enhance the quality and diversity of the town centre, with new fit-for-purpose retail and much-needed food and drink and leisure offers. And while we are seeing some sites come forward in the wider OAPF area, too many of these sites are stalled while developers are awaiting the green light for the Westfield Whitgift redevelopment. And so we believe that this comprehensive redevelopment of the town centre site will provide that much needed investor confidence to progress these sites and to allow Croydon's potential to be realised. And just to quickly recap on some of those benefits, 7,000 new jobs. We've got 626 to 697 new homes potentially coming forward, with 20% of those affordable. We've got 2 new department stores and circa 174,000 square metres of retail and leisure space. It's a £1.4 million investment, which will provide 20 million increase in business rates per annum. There'll be new community facilities, and overall, we are satisfied that these all meet policy requirements. We have worked in partnership with the GLA and TfL and engaged with the developer to agree an appropriate level of mitigation, and officers are satisfied that development is acceptable in planning terms, and this includes Section 106 around TV mitigation to cover the points that were raised by one of the objectors. This is a key development, and it provides significant public benefits, and it will be instrumental in helping to realise the Council's ambitions in respect of placemaking, growth and regeneration.
Okay, thank you very much. Just say a few quick words, reflecting some of those that have been said, and one or two other things. It is clearly a once in a generation opportunity to transform our city centre. I'm conscious, though, that we said that about 4 years ago, and we do need to be supporting that transformation to move forward, particularly when schemes such as this can deliver up to circa 7,000 jobs. But as Heather has alluded to, also helping to drive forward the further regeneration of the whole of the city centre, and of course the regeneration benefits that brings to the wider borough, creating a new heart to the city centre where people can live, work, play, dine, and of course shop. We all find outline applications somewhat frustrating. When they're parameter type schemes like this, I think it's all the more so, and Councillor Prince expressed some exasperation there in terms of we don't know at this stage whether it will be 4 or 5 towers, which is a fairly significant sort of thing. We don't know if it's going to be, look at the model this big or that big, but it will make a lot of difference. But this is a major scheme, and it will make has the potential to deliver huge difference for the residents of Croydon. I think we do, as we sort of go into our sort of final deliberations now, need to be balancing the impact on the heritage assets against the benefits of the wider scheme. And I think some regret has been mentioned in, or suggested through the questions in terms of the loss of one of the facades in particular, and maybe that could be taken on board. I say we can't enforce that, but could be taken on board that kind of sort of look and feel could be reintroduced into elements of the new build as it comes forward. The almost 1,000 new homes is obviously to be welcomed, and we would look forward, hopefully, to those coming forward quickly. We do note, though, that obviously as the scheme stands at the moment, or the proposal stands at the moment, that could be somewhat delayed. We would hope that that would come forward as quickly as possible. And as far as is practical, a single phase delivery would be better than a number of drawn-out phases. The affordable housing is going to be in perpetuity. Isn't quite at the level we'd like to see it at, but hopefully those 3 review mechanisms will gradually drive it up, and we will see a higher proportion. And then finally, just to say, the delivery of the east-west link via the Galleria, I think, is going to be very positive. It's something that we've been striving for a long time. This is a very big block to be divided as soon as the shops shut. So seeing that come forward with a stepless route running through, somewhat more enclosed than we would necessarily have hoped for, but I think it is very positive to see that coming forward. We just look forward to, if members tonight are minded to support this, and I will be supporting it myself, to see this scheme happen quickly, happen positively, but very much with public scrutiny continuing as the design develops, through bringing back the reserved matters to this committee for decision. I think that's absolutely key. I think whatever, if we do decide to support this, I think we definitely want to make sure that that happens, and so that we see the scheme develop in the way that we all want to see it develop positively for the benefit of our city centre. Councillor Kabir, and then Councillor Perry.
Mr. Chairman, just want to recall about 5-6 years ago, we went to Bristol to look at Hammerston project there, and then we also visited other Westfield project. And it's been in our mind for a number of years because when conversation started. And I am so happy that it's coming to Croydon rather than Bromley or somewhere else. So I think it's a very public benefit. It's a benefit to Croydon. So I'm not going to repeat all the key points about 7,000 jobs and all that. We know everyone knows in here that these are the facts, these are the benefits. I'm pleased to see that student accommodation is also contained in the plan and all that. And there is a review mechanism about affordable, and that's a plus point which we didn't have in earlier outline application. So I'm going to move for approval without further say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Firstly, may I thank the officers for a very fulsome report and presentation to the committee tonight, and they've dealt with a number of detailed questions, and I think they've dealt with it very well, so thank you to our officers. I think what we have before us is a second chance, really, for a scheme that has the potential to very much put Croydon back on the map as a retail centre of regional importance. We've heard the numbers, up to 7,000 jobs, 1.4 billion of investment, up to 1,000 new homes, 20 million uplift in business rates, 8.9 million in new homes bonus. And these are all numbers that cannot be ignored, and we mustn't ignore them. This will be, and hopefully can be, a destination shopping centre. It's something that Croydon currently lacks, which means that people move out to other areas and go to other destinations. This will bring shoppers and families back to our town centre. I think the greatly increased public realm that we see around the site will be very beneficial, and I think it will breathe new life into George Street, bring life to Poplar Walk, which really isn't there at the moment, so I think a public realm at that end of the scheme is very welcomed. And I think also in North End, with the new walkway through, the 24-hour access, and also the grammar school entrance to the leisure offer, I think will all be very important. I'm pleased committee has been involved all the way through this process, through the pre-app, And whilst the scheme is so important and the numbers are so important, I think we have pushed hard on various issues as this has gone through the process, the East-West link being one of those, the importance of that link, the importance it feels open and that it gives that permeability through the site, and the importance that it's 24-hour and we maintain that 24-hour link going forward. We regularly complain about outline schemes, but for obvious reasons, this is a parameter scheme, and there's clearly still much work to be done. But I think it is vital that the reserve matters are brought back to committee, and I think we must include that in the recommendations tonight. A scheme of this importance cannot be determined behind closed doors. It must be discussed and agreed in public. It is of such importance to the whole town. Indeed, to the region, this is a very important scheme. So we do have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I think collectively we've got to make sure that this happens. So I'm very happy to second the officer's recommendations with the return of reserved matters to this committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Kabir agrees with that point as well about the reserve matters. Yeah. Okay, I've seen Councillor Audsley, Councillor Wright, Councillor Wimborne, Councillor Chatterjee, and I think I'll probably take every member as we go through. But if I start with, well, move on to those four. So Councillor Audsley next.
Thank you, Chair. And I would also like to add my thanks to those who have worked on the scheme to date. For me, this is the right thing to do, so I will be supporting the application. I think just to add some thoughts, I too would express a degree of sadness that the level of affordable housing is not higher. And as I think about the kind of offer that was presented to Croydon by the applicants, then of course I agree that millennials want experiences and a different way of living. But the millennials I'm in touch with, and I'm sure those on the committee, also want an affordable house, also want a living wage job. So the devil will be in the detail. The numbers are numbers. How those numbers play out in terms of who wins and who loses as our town moves forward, ultimately is the work that we must and will need to do. So, to give me confidence, if the applicant comes back to us and sets a percentage of 7,000 jobs that become London living wage jobs, sets a percentage of young people that enter the development and work in it and go on to living in an affordable home, then I will be confident in our future. That is the work to do. I would like to add my approval, but the job will not yet be done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chairman. Of course, we must wholeheartedly welcome the application in front of us tonight. It's been a little while coming, but it's delighted that we've got such a good application, and that the officers have addressed all the slight worries and concerns that we had at the pre-app and the previous committees. One or two small things which well, small in the broad context, but nevertheless important things which I think we need to look at. And the first one, I think, is the archaeological dig, and that is absolutely vital, I think, in that particular area, that we don't start piling before we have every ounce of archaeological survey that we can possibly have, because it is so vital to the history of the town. So things were another point which I'm a little concerned is that the TfL comments regarding the public transport particularly, and they are concerned, and I think I share their concern that there will be a massive strain on public transport when this application is completed, particularly with the buses and the trams. I mean, I know we have the Dingwall Loop, but I wonder will that will be sufficient to take the obvious increase in usage that the trams will have, and West Croydon Station, with its overground surveys, will also have a huge input from people visiting the complex. So that I think needs to be. I think more work needs to be done, if I might suggest, on those, particularly regarding the TfL comments. I think they're very valid, and we ought to have a long look at them. On St Michael's Church, I mean, I remember talking about this when it previously came to this committee, and I'm glad that we've looked at this, and St Michael's Square, I'm sure, will give a better thing. But as the report says, there's a lot of work still needs to be done, I think, on the south aspect. And I would hope to see that we're going to have a more concern on that south aspect, because that is very important to the look and the appearance of St Michael's Church. Regarding the possibility about a hotel or student, I'd like to put my vote behind a student, because I think they will add a great deal to the town and to its, particularly perhaps to its night economy. So as a student there. We're losing a lot of office space. I think 47,000 square metres, I think, was mentioned in the report, and that is a little concern to me, because I think office space and office use in the town do add to the retail, and I'd like to see that perhaps we could have another look at not necessarily with this particular application, but in its surroundings, so that we do bring offices back into the towns, because they do create an awful lot of usage for traders. I'm sure traders will appreciate them. Could I just join Councillor Khan's remarks regarding the play area? I think something which we ought to really push for in the complex. I mean, IKEA have a very small sort of play area, but something along those lines, where we have soft play for the small children, will be a tremendous asset to the thing, and also, of course, it can be something for the housing box, because they're not going to have a great deal of play area. So there we are. Another very small thing, of course, which was finally mentioned, Chairman, is that I see in one of the informatives we've got a swift nests. I will applaud that, because I think it's the first time I've noticed with swift nests. Could I also add that perhaps we should look at falcon nests as well? We used to have a peregrine falcon on top of the house. Disappeared, I think, but if we could get that falcon back, it would be great. So there are concerns, Mr. Chairman, and although they may, in the broad aspect of this thing, be quite small, I think that they also need to be carefully considered and looked at. And one final thing, they mentioned park and ride and facilities for park and ride. Perhaps we could talk to surrounding boroughs, because particularly at weekends, the park and ride is offered to shoppers to come from Redhill, Merstham in the south and elsewhere in the east and west, so that that brings more shoppers into the area and brings them on public transport, which of course will be very useful. So I would definitely support this application, Mr. Chairman, and wish it well.
Okay, thank you. And I think bringing the falcon back, or falcons back, really good point as well. Some really other important points there, but let's not lose sight of that. That would be really positive, wouldn't it? Can I see here now, Councillor Wimborne, please?
Thank you, Chairman. A scheme of huge significance to Croydon will bring significant economic, social and environmental benefits to the town, a scheme which is deliverable and key to Croydon fulfilling its potential. I'm absolutely delighted to support the scheme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Chatterjee?
Thanks very much, Chairman. I'd echo the many thanks that have been mentioned by colleagues around the Chamber for all the help that's been given by the presenting officers and answering all the questions. This is obviously very much improved in lots of ways since the 2014 scheme. We've had the benefit of hearing from various voices, both in terms of the documents and around the table, and also from Mr. Crichton as the projector. And I think that probably strengthens our ways of thinking in different perspectives. Obviously, we're determining this particular application which is before us, the one that's actually of a somewhat imprecise nature in some ways, but we have very, very clear parameters, and we've been well informed and well able to ask questions on all of those things. I think this is an opportunity for the angel to be in the detail as well, though. So we look forward to further things developing on that, and like I think the other voices expressed, I am minded to support approval.
So we have falcons and angels in the architecture. Fantastic. Okay. Can I see anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Khan?
Thank you, Chair. I'm still in the bargain basement. Added to the play area for the children and the play space, I would like to see some water features where, and it's not terribly expensive and not elaborate, but I've seen it in other settings where the water springs up, it comes up in colour, there's music in the background, and the children have an awful lot of fun. And I know our climate is not great, but we do have a summer and certain areas in the year where it is. And I'd really like to see something like that. It doesn't cost a fortune, like I say, I'm in the bargain basement. And I'd like to thank the officers for all the hard work that's gone into this. My goodness, what a challenge and what challenges they've faced. So thank you very much indeed.
So a little bit of sort of Somerset House. Manchester, they have one of those things in Manchester as well. I was up there a while back. It was quite cold and quite miserable, but the kids were still really enjoying it. So I don't think we can insist on that, but I think it's a good idea. And again, those one or two members of the developers and their design teams here tonight might want to take that away as a good idea. Okay, Councillor Trackerslawler.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very happy to support the application this evening. There's a lot of detail and some concerns that have been expressed in terms of the numbers of affordable housing, which I share. The scheme is going to be hugely beneficial for Croydon. You look at the number of jobs, the training opportunities that are coming, the aspirations and the dreams of young millennials will finally, hopefully, be realised. So I'm absolutely delighted to support the application, and I'd rather it were built next week rather than in 52 months.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Prince, did you have anything further to add?
Yes, I too will be supporting the application because obviously of crucial importance to Croydon, but not in a completely uncritical way. I think the developers must not regard what looks to be shaping up as a unanimous support as carte blanche. We will, I think, have to keep a very close eye on this. We will insist on quality. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's unless anybody has anything further to add, as a good and important sort of closing point. This is a step on the journey. We are all looking for a very high quality development here. This is a very significant development, a very large development. We want to see it come forward in a considerate way, a way that's going to work for kids, it's going to work for falcons, there's going to be some angels in the architecture, there's going to be all sorts of different things happening here. We want to make sure it's something that in a few, hopefully relatively few years' time, we can all walk through or push our bikes through and enjoy a fantastic new part and reinvigorated part of our city or town centre. Right, okay, well, we had some very positive words this evening. I think we've got a feeling of which way this is going, but we will go through the proper procedures. So we've had the one motion moved and completed, which was for approval, moved by Councillor Kabir and seconded by Councillor Perry, with the requirement for reserved matters to be returned to the committee for decision. Can I see those in favour? So that is approved unanimously, and that brings this evening to a close. Thank you very much, everybody.